generation, that is going to be a tongue twister with those G's this whole class, many of which are formed based on the shared experiences of that generation. Major political, social, and economic events that have happened in your life form your generational identity. So, whereas, and I'll use myself as an example, I'm a Gen Xer, but I was raised by very young parents. And so I have a lot of generalizations about me and bits of my generational identity that align with baby boomers as well, because my parents were really young and kind of I was raised alongside them. So I also relate much with that generation. And then I am raising Gen Zers. And so as a parent, you find yourself aligning a lot with the generation of your children as well, or even your siblings. So while it's those sort of life experiences that start to shape our lens for looking at generational shared experiences, um, it it's also very important to understand that they are just that. They're generalizations or stereotypes. They don't apply to everyone and they don't apply in every situation. So while we're going to look at these generalizations through our common generations, it's most important to understand how to work with others in the workplace as individuals. And we fully identify that. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So I would love to hear from a few of you. What are some stereotypes that exist about your generation and maybe a little bit about your generational identity?
This is Aaron. I can get us kicked off on that. So one thing that I feel like the millennial generation, which I'm a part of, thing I've heard a lot recently is we were like the first generation where everybody was given a prize. Like it didn't matter like how you did competition wise. It was just like you get a prize and you get a prize and you know everybody had some kind of award given to them without maybe necessarily actually achieving anything. Like some people look down on it in that way. So.
And what do you think has formed that sort of stereotype or piece of that identity?
I would say the stereotype that has formed around that idea is that the millennials all think that you just get what you want and you don't actually have to like work for it. It's just kind of like, well, yeah, you're going to get a prize at the end. That's how it works. You just get a prize at the end. Doesn't matter what you did to get there, but you still get an award. I don't know. I don't really feel like that happened to me that much, so I don't know. It's just a thing that I've heard rumblings of. Like, we were the first generation where everybody was a winner and you didn't really have to do anything to get the award.
I love that. We have some characteristics, some words to describe that. Wanting things without having to work for it, or entitled, and those are absolutely stereotypes of millennials, not realistic characteristics of all millennials, right? It's a great example. But what a good point, Taylor. Like, it's not like the millennials are giving participation ribbons to themselves, right? This is probably actually my fault. But yeah, it's such a great example that these stereotypes and words get associated with generations because of things they have experienced. And so we're going to get a little deeper into that as well. Ashley, what were you going to share?
I was just going to piggyback back off of that a little bit. I'm also a millennial. And I think our generation was also one of the first ones that was told that we can do anything we want and be anything we want. And so we all have the expectation that we're going to be whatever we want. And it's just a different mindset because so many generations before us were like, they had a lot more sexism in them, I guess, too, of like, you're going to grow up, you're going to get married, you're going to have kids, you're going to stay home with them for females, and men, you're going to be the provider. And our generation a lot more was like, go do whatever you want and you can achieve it, and you're going to get that participation trophy at the end of it too. So
I totally agree. And in my eyes, because I believe I see that in my own children, I think that's a positive thing. I can think you can be whatever you want to be. So let's take a look at each of the generations a little bit. We're going to take a look at a persona from each generation and some of the generalized characteristics of that persona, as well as some of the sort of important differences of their generational identities. And remember, general overview, these don't apply to everyone in this characteristic. And then what we're going to talk about is help understand from you what is some of this generational identity and what has caused it. So I'll start with the traditionalists, and I'll even cover a tiny bit of the baby boomers since we don't have any of those folks in the room. So it says here they may prefer to communicate with handwritten notes instead of email, right? Or even you could say in writing versus maybe, in extensive writing versus maybe texts or something. And so I thought about this a little bit, and the reality is folks in these generations did not have technology easily accessible. So they formed all of their communication habits prior to having phones in everybody's hands, which didn't happen until the early 2000s, or even wide accessibility to the internet, which didn't happen until the 1990s. And so traditionalists and baby boomers went through all of their formative years figuring out how they communicate with other people without having those other tools available. So of course it makes sense that they would maybe, as a generational identity, prefer to communicate in more written forms. Now, we could all probably think of examples, folks that work in the IT field or were part of that original innovation around technology who probably do not ascribe to those characteristics, but it makes sense why they would be common for this sort of generation. So what about baby boomers? Take a look at this and raise your hand. What can you learn from what you see here? And what parts of this generation do you think are forming their generational identity? Anybody? Come on, we can talk about the baby boomers. They're not here.
I think it's interesting. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Katie, and then Lauren.
I think it's interesting. In some of my previous work experiences, I worked with baby boomers. And so that workaholic mentality, like having when the company shifted to more of a flexible work schedule where you weren't working that normal like 8 to 5, or you had flexibility in the day to flex your hours and work later into the evening, or they were always the ones typically pinging me right away, like early morning, because they were starting their day. Whereas some of my other coworkers, you wouldn't see them active till like 9 or 10. And it really created like a different dynamic on the team because there was this misunderstanding of, well, they're not working as hard because they're not working at the same time as I am, when really at the end, when we would have meetings where it would show like what everybody's working on and what they accomplished, there was almost kind of this surprise of like, oh, there has been work going on and I just never thought it was happening. And so just some of the conversations that originated from those are interesting.
Such a good point, Katie. And both, I think all generations have opinions and characteristics about what it looks like to be a good employee, to be a hard worker. And that's the commonality we can look for, even if we have different criteria for it. Lauren, what were you going to share?
I was just going to share, I almost put it in the chat, but it really jumps out at me, the like loyalty mentality that most baby boomers do kind of ascribe to. I struggle with this, as a child of parent, or my parents are baby boomers, and that loyalty mentality completely like is understandable from their generation because there was often a pension at the end of that loyalty or additional benefits that just truly no longer are offered in the same capacity that they were. And even in the absence of that, I think that habit or that belief, it kind of just continues on. And there's that thought that, if you say you're going to show up in any form, whether it's at work or personally, like you got to show up, you got to make sure that you're following through on, what you've said you're going to. And you can tell that, at least with my parents, I can tell it like really rocks them sometimes with this radical idea that maybe you only stay in a role for a couple of years and you move on to something that's better or more aligned with what millennials are looking for, which is purpose and meaning associated with their work. It's not about just a paycheck.
Such a good point. I was just trying to type madly fast, but I hadn't even thought of that, Lauren, and it's such a good point. As we're moving in next to Gen X, keep that in mind. Baby boomers working towards a pension. There was always this big reward related to retirement. And now Gen X is our first population that is being told you may not even have Social Security when you retire, right? There may not be anything left, probably even more impact on millennials. So great point. Okay, Carla, go ahead. Carla with a K.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I can see where maybe that the workaholic and factor would come in. So being raised solely by my mom as a single mother, raising 3 children, going to work full time, going to school part time so she can get her college degrees. They're constantly doing something and involved. So I was just gonna say I can see how that could be a stereotype for that generation for sure. They didn't have as many options and the flexibility and different things. I mean, absolutely, you pushed through, you did what you had to do. So.
Great. Yes, great examples. Great way to back that up. Okay, let's take a look at the Gen Xers. What are some stereotypes? I know we've got some couple Gen Xers in the room. And what formed those? What life experiences maybe? So I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with Emergenetics, but it's like a sort of personality assessment. And I am a Gen Xer, and my Emergenetics profile is prove it. I am skeptical. That is so much a part of my personality and definitely a generational attribute that applies to me. And I think it's because when the internet first came out, we were constantly being talked to about what is real information and what is not, and looking at everything through this skeptical lens of suddenly all this information's available out there, and a lot of it is not fact. And so I think that impacts me a lot in that part of my personality. Tommy, what were you going to share?
Yeah, it was actually kind of similar to what you were saying. I think because of what was going on in the world at that time, there was a lot of uncertainty, not only from the government, but also like companies in general were still like figuring out how to incorporate technology into what they do. And because of that, there was a lot of, we say that this technology can do this, but oh no, it actually made things worse. So I think the Gen X generation was like right at the beginning of like the technology movement. And because of the uncertainty with that, it caused that generation to just be skeptical about anything. And then like you were saying, how like the internet was supposed to kind of like be this huge end all be all of accurate, true information, that wasn't quite it.
Such a good point, Tommy. I totally agree. while you were talking, I was also thinking like this is the first generation where we have seen a focus on diversity mentioned. And when I think of what I have experienced in my life as a Gen Xer that has also made me very focused on diversity and inclusion, is that we're the first generation where diversity moved beyond just maybe gender and race. And we started to talk a lot more about sexual orientation and sex and those types of things within the lens of diversity. So it really started to expand our definition of diversity. Brandon, go ahead.
Yeah, to piggyback off that a little bit, that's a great call out on the diversity because one of the reasons independent, skeptical, informal, flexible, both my parents worked. So I got off the school bus or I got a ride home from school. I opened the door, I made myself a snack, I did my homework, I turned on Saved by the Bell. I was raised by sitcoms. What I saw, social interaction was what I saw on TV. So I saw people of different sexual orientations and genders and colors and everything represented more. Not like it is today even, but it was starting to more, to your point. And so I became independent. I started finding my own answers to things. I mean, the Encarta Encyclopedia disc was one of the first ones on the Gateway computer. And if you're picturing a cow box, you're in my age group. Yeah, so it was just both parents working. I was independent. It was come home when the street lights are on, call me if you need anything, but I'm going to trust you to take care of yourself. And so I did.
Very much so. Oh my gosh, such a good point. You guys are thinking now. We absolutely the latchkey generation. Yeah. Oh, that's how I was raised as well. All right. What about millennials? Taylor, you want to start us off on this one?
Yeah. So think about millennials, which majority of us in here are. If we want to pull back up that graph, we can see that 13 of the 17 are millennials. So I would love to hear from you all. What comes to mind? How can you benefit from working with millennials if you're not one, or what benefits is it working with another millennial?
Great question.
I think
would
for
say-
me, my
Go ahead, Michelle.
communication style is definitely like, don't call me, text me, right? Like, I need quick information fast, like give it to me as like transparent and quickly as possible. And I'm also that way with my information. Like, how can I get that information as quickly as possible so that I can process it and focus on it and do it?
Awesome. Yeah.
What has caused that? What is the life experience that led to that?
Just we were created in the atmosphere, like we still had really awful dial-up internet, like especially me from being a small country Bodunk town, like it was awful dial-up. So, and the phones, we didn't have the, I don't even remember what they were called, but where you like hit the line and the operator assigned you through. Like I came from a small town that still had that when I left, kind of a thing. So I came from the mixture of both. And I remember when the internet really came like full circle, I was like, this is amazing. I can get all of my information quickly. And I also came from the generation my parents had encyclopedias like stacked up across the whole wall. So it was nice being able to have that internet and have that quick, tangible effort to information.
Absolutely. Great example.
Ashley, do you want to share?
Yes, if I can find the right button. I would say for me, I expect a lot of instant gratification because of the evolution of technology during my lifetime. I saw something recently. It was like a phrase that you'll never hear from, or you never would have heard in the 80s. And it was like, I'll just Google that. You want to find the answer to something and it's instant gratification that we can find it. And so as a leader, something that I have to work on is empathy, because I'm like, I talk and I just expect results. I'm like, this is what's going wrong. This is how we fix it. Okay, let's do it. Whereas I think in the past, because there wasn't so much technology and instant gratification available, there was a little bit more patience with each other.
I love that, Ashley. That was a great point. to wrap us up, Justin, I think your hand was up for millennials before we move on. Do you want to wrap
Yeah,
us
I
up?
was going to talk about the instant gratification also, and then
Yeah.
Ashley just kind of nailed it. But yeah, it's that idea of like, I need an answer, and I've got this supercomputer in the palm of my hand that'll tell me whatever I want, compared to computers from even the 90s that were the only desktop options. Your laptops were even quite large and not even half as capable of what some of our phones can do. So I think that's a big thing that led to that idea of like, if you can't tell me what I want to know in less than 2 minutes, then why are we even doing this sometimes? So it's that instant gratification, short attention spans.
Yes.
One thing I have noticed, maybe this is when we go into the next generation, is I'm a 90s baby, watched a lot of the cartoons, and they had like good continuous stories that go from episode to episode to episode. And a lot of the cartoons nowadays, like there's a 20-minute episode and actually has 3 different stories within that 20-minute sequence. And you're like, what just happened? Like this, like everything seems very disjointed because there's no ongoing continuous story, because of, in my opinion, there's a lot of short attention spans, or like if the story's not complete in that short amount of time, then you start to lose people.
Yeah, Justin, I think about like someone mentioned Google, like Googling it. If it's not on the first page of Google, I'm not hitting the next, I'm not looking at this any other page after it. I'm just I'm researching something else, changing the words up a bit. So I definitely agree with that one. But just so we can wrap up and make sure we're being aware of time, Gen Z, who
I
wants to
wanna-
speak to this?
I want to hit something Ashley said
Yeah.
in the chat really quick. She said, I think employers also expect more of that instant gratification. This is such an interesting topic, and we thought about heading down this path and then realized 55 minutes just isn't enough time. But it's so incredible to think about, how does the workforce change as millennials become the leaders within the workforce, and they bring their generational identity into those leadership roles, and how does the workforce change as that happens generation by generation. So just something else to keep in the back of your minds. Thanks for moving us on, Taylor. Go ahead. Who wants to talk
Yeah.
about Gen Z?
Who wants to share about Gen Z?
We
What
have
are
one in here?
So, it is me, although I identify as a millennial, I am the Gen Zer. I just think there's a ton of stereotypes, and I'm not joking when I say I do identify as a millennial. I'm so close to it. I just feel it's more of, you don't, some stereotypes, some generalizations of Gen Zers are that, you know, you want all these things, you want to be moved up, make a lot of money, have a house, have all the things, but don't want to work for it. That is what I would say is the stereotype for a Gen Zer. But also thinking about technology, we grew up with technology for several years now. It's been in our lives, from MySpace, Facebook, all the things. So it's also expected that we know technology really well, which is not always true. Doesn't mean that we can code and be able to know Excel to the full extent. So there is just a lot of stereotypes, mostly negative, I would say, about Gen Z. But there is a lot to be proud of with the generations, I guess. Although like I said, don't identify as that, because I think about my little sister, who is a true Gen Zer, who kind of falls under those stereotypes a bit. Whereas I don't think that myself, but I think it's on lived experiences based on seeing like the recession in 2008 and seeing what my family went through, and just what work was like for my parents, and how I have always worked since as soon as I could before I even had my license. So I believe it is all about your experience and what you've lived through.
I have had the opportunity to work a lot alongside Taylor, and it's interesting to work with someone who is a true hybrid, like falls on that cusp within a few years and has experienced a lot of both. Because I would say you are very driven and focused on moving up, but moving up based on growing and developing yourself, which I think is really two pieces of those two different generations. So all right, you want to let Brandon talk and then move into the challenges?
Yeah, go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, I just find this interesting because I would be insanely frustrated if I was Gen Z, because I think this is the first generation that was born into what the promise of the future and all this technology was supposed to bring them. The inclusion, the diversity. I think this generation is looking at things going, aren't we past that? Can't we move forward? Can't I have a bunch of stuff without working hard for it if I'm creative and diligent and I put in some effort? Why is this so hard now? Why are houses so doggone expensive when all this technology was supposed to make things easier, more streamlined, simpler, and drive the cost down? So I think they've just been, and my generation started it, and millennials probably feel it too. But it's just, no, we're supposed to be the Jetsons right now, where you come to work, you sit down, you push the button, you make sure nothing explodes, and you go home.
I love that perspective. Just like I think Carla and the other Carla both said is a great point. I agree, Brandon. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So we thank you everyone for participating, by the way, through those. It's really fun to hear from all of you. But we are going to move on to challenges. So as we learn more and more about each generation, there are challenges in working with different generations and at Canvas or in other work spaces, even everyday life, just communicating several things, any interaction you have, there's sometimes that it could be difficult because of the generational difference. So as we look at this, these are some challenges that you may come across when you're working with different generations, starting out with communication gaps. These can exist due to lack of common language, different vocabulary, preferred communication tools. I can relate to that one. I like efficiency and like Teams chatting, which goes along with all the other generations, but sometimes that doesn't align with everyone else. They want to meet in person, which most of us would like that too, meeting in person, email. I'm like so against email because I don't think it's quick enough for most things. So that is just my own opinion on that, but it varies throughout each person and each generation. We also have assumptions, which we talk about stereotyping, making assumptions, objectifying or generalizing other people, which can be a challenge. And then moving on to different expectations. We don't all hold the same expectations, and definitely while we looked at all the generations, different generations hold different expectations as well. What's most important to them, accomplishments, what hierarchy looks like, how moving up in the workplace looks like. So we also have different expectations as a challenge as well. I want to open it up to all of you and ask, what personal experiences do you have, or what challenges have you faced so far about working with different generations? Or it could be working with the same generation, but I would love to hear it.
I would say the thing I've noticed the most is just the different communication styles, breakdowns there, like, different generations and the way they want to communicate. Maybe it's in person, over a text, or whatever. I've just noticed, I feel like that's where, like, if we could get all the generations on the same page on, like, we use this technology to give this kind of communication, and we use this technology to do this communication, we may all be better communicators at that point. But that's one thing I see.
Absolutely. Great point, Aaron. Tommy, what were you going to say? And then we'll go to Ashley.
Yeah, so working in the comm center up here, I mean, this is my life. We get, members calling in that are, they have their birth dates, they're like, 1942, all the way up to like, now we're starting to get people calling in that have their birthdays in like 2005, 2006. And so just dealing with that on a daily basis, like, you were listing these off and I'm like, yep, there's the communication gaps, there's the assumptions, because we'll have people that call in and, they just want to go to the top. So the first words out of their mouth is, get me to a supervisor. And that also ties into the different expectations because, some generations think only supervisors can do the job. and others like will avoid supervisors at all costs, and even to the point of, they may not like the answer that was given, they may not understand the answer, but they'll go along with it because they don't want to cause conflict. So it's very interesting to see day by day how these different generations interact with each other.
Tommy, you have a great like firsthand experience in that since you and I would say retail family get experience that every day. So thank you for sharing it. It's so true that I haven't thought about how much our frontline staff is working with all generations all the time and having to adapt to each of those generations. And I'm looking at Haley's comment in the chat how sometimes someone can come across blunt versus softer language, assumptions of what intentions are based on generation. It's so true. So thank you, Tommy, and thank you, Haley, as well. Ashley, go ahead.
When you were talking about the language that people use, it's kind of funny because we had that in my branch recently where somebody said something about no cap. And half of us were like, what does that mean? Like, I don't understand what cap means. And so it literally had to be explained that it's like no lies or something like that, because there's new slang and we just completely don't understand each other. We're speaking the same language, but different versions of it. And then with the expectations, one thing that I've seen a lot, like in my previous job, there was multiple generations and the manager was a Gen Z, or not Gen Z, Gen X. And then we had a few millennials and then the Gen Z. And the expectations of leadership are very different based on the generation, and what they want from a leader and a manager is very different than what previous generations have kind of expected. And so trying to adapt to being the middle manager in between the older generation and the younger generations was a challenge that was completely because of how they grew up and what they were taught and how they were taught to do things. And so watching everyone try to adapt was interesting.
Yes, and that all goes back to those lived experiences, just like you said, Ashley. Thank you. Okay, so not to rush us, but I do need to move on to our benefits, which are the most important part of this. So while there are some challenges, we also have benefits that outweigh those. So here are some on the screen. I'm going to give you a second to read them real quick, and then we'll break them down. So all of these are benefits, and we really are trying to harness the different perspectives of each generation, starting with breaking down those stereotypes, which we're all kind of doing today as we talk through the different generations and whether you relate to it or don't, or identify as another one. Shannon, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think just one of these benefits that seems the most relevant to me at Canvas is this idea of expanded service, which we talked about a little bit already. Diversity within our workplace that mirrors or matches the diversity of the members we want to serve. And looking at, I know we have been challenged to look at expanding our sort of scope of our members. And I think a lot of that means expanding the representation within our CanFam as well, in order to ensure we understand the populations that we're trying to serve.
And we all generations bring in such valuable perspectives and ideas and services into Canvas. And I do believe that at Canvas, we do a great job of having people of all generations here, and being able to work with people of different ages and ethnicities and genders is just amazing. I'm glad to be a part of that here at Canvas, and even being able to talk to this today. Does anyone want to share anything with the benefits of where you've experienced it here at Canvas or somewhere else?
So oh, go ahead, Brandon. Or Haley and then Brandon.
Sure.
I'll go.
Oh,
Yep,
go
go
ahead,
for it.
Brandon. Okay.
Okay, I'll go. I'm turning right. I'm going at the stop sign.
it.
I had the fortune to be an HR manager at JCPenney this a while ago, and most of my staff was 17-year-olds, and they kept me young is a huge benefit of that. You talk about no cap, but just learning the new slang, staying in touch with things, keeping up on things. What are the cool shows? Constantly reminding me there's different ways to look at things. Just the way the younger generations interact with each other, they're more likely to go towards each other for help and support and use the teamwork. And then the flip side of that is working with some of the older generations, especially if you're in an industry they've been in for a while, they can be a little jaded. So to have that balance, so with experience comes the jading, and then with the youthfulness comes the enthusiasm and maybe a little naivety. But yeah, so I find balance having both around me. I can't imagine being the youngest generation or the oldest generation in a place because I think you would miss out on whatever side that is to keep you balanced.
Yes, that's great, Brandon. I agree like 100% with that as well. Being a part of either end can be difficult, and trying to find that middle ground and being able to work effectively with others. Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Haley, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. No, I loved what Brandon said, and I think like he spoke to, I feel that I'm more effective when I'm working with folks from different generations instead of just the same as mine. It's nice and helpful when everybody feels that they agree on everything, but it may not be the most effective solution or whatnot. The other thing I would say is, especially coming into new roles or whatnot, working with folks that have been around the block. So when something new happens, or there's a change, or there's a new process or whatever, it's nice to have kind of the reassurance that, yes, we've been here before and here's how we've gotten through this, regardless of what that is. Obviously things are going to be different and new, but, taking some expertise to alleviate some of that never been here before anxiety that can occur in a new workplace or in a new industry or whatnot. So I find that it's really beneficial to have those conversations with different generations, both older and younger. But since I'm more towards the younger scale, I think grabbing some of that expertise is really helpful.
Amazing.
I love that y'all are already looking at the things we can learn from each other across different generations. I hate that I'm saying this out loud, but being one of the older or oldest generation represented here, goodness gracious, way to make me feel old today, people. I feel like I'm still relevant when people come to me to ask for my lived experience when they don't yet have it. But I also really, really depend on those that are newer to the workplace and have learned so much more than me about what is current and relevant. I depend on that so much in order to also remain current and relevant myself. So,
And I ditto that from the other end too. I'm fortunate enough to be able to work with several people of different generations, and I just don't know what it would be like to only work with my generation or just one other generation. It's amazing to all work together to hear everyone's ideas, thoughts, opinions. I learned so much from everyone, and that's kind of like why we're here, right? So, with 9 minutes left, I'm gonna hand it back over to Shannon to wrap us up. So, Shannon, take us away.
yeah. So the whole point of this is to get you thinking about what can we do as an organization and as individuals in order to retain a multi or intergenerational workforce, in order to overcome the challenges and really capitalize on those benefits. So we've put together a few ideas here. So really those meaningful one-on-one relationships can build intergenerational awareness. I mean, Taylor and I worked on this project together, and we're able to learn from each other at opposite ends of the generational spectrum here in our workplace to really understand and break down some of those misperceptions. Two-way mutual mentoring. We, often think of mentoring first off as someone older or more experienced mentoring someone younger. Erin dropped a great resource into our chat about generational mentorships, and those can be two-way mentorships. I help you with my maybe work or life experience, and you help me with what is relevant or current now. Or how can we look at this in a new way or a more innovative way? Focusing on commonality is a really big one. Whether you're the leader of an intergenerational team and can help them come together to focus on common goals, because a team should have common goals regardless of the generations on it, or whether you're an individual working with a peer that's in another generation, focusing on what you as individuals have in common. It's that commonality that helps break down the barriers or the silos amongst the generations. The reality is, we all are trying to solve the same problems in our workplace, in our culture, in our lives, in our world. We just come at them from different ways. So if we can value how each other comes at them and identify we're all trying to accomplish the same thing, those different perspectives can be really valuable. So what ideas do you all have for working across generations, or what have you tried or experienced that's really worked for you?
I would say one thing that I've tried and that seems to work, and this goes beyond, working between generational gaps, just meeting the person where they are, and truly opening yourself up with no expectations or judgment, and just going to that person and figuring out what needs to be done and working with them openly to find a solution.
I love that, meeting people where they are. And it's important to know where people are as individuals in order to find that commonality and meet them there. Carla, what were you going to add?
I was just gonna say, like, I'm not kidding, sadly, about my kids needing to help me change the TV over, but I just, for some reason, technology is not my jam. Like, that whole thing passed me by, even though I'm in that generation. It just doesn't click. So I'm always very much in admiration of those younger than me and how savvy they are at it, how quickly and natural it comes to them. So for me, I think it would always be important for me to partner with people who have that kind of experience. They can do things much faster and more efficiently than I ever could. So I really appreciate that about the younger generations for sure.
And to take that and kind of shift the perspective, I believe every generation has those abilities to do something quick based on what they're specialized in. Uh, you know, I'm the tech person, I'm gonna unplug it and plug it back in and hope it works, because that's just not me. While other people, can do it differently and really understand it, Justin being one of them, and we are not in the same generation. So I believe everyone in here is able to take something and do it quickly to the best of their ability, what with different things. And I think that is so important for all of us. We are specialized in certain things, and working together, we're able to bring it all together and just make the most of it.
What great perspectives. Carla, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say one other thing that I like to do when like interviewing people or when they're new to our team, things like that. I always like to find out what motivates them. Because everybody's motivated by something so different. So for me, like receiving praise, whether it be private or public, doesn't matter, but I really thrive on that. Whereas other people, that is something that's completely turns them off. So everybody has a little different thing. And I always think it's interesting to learn, and that can sometimes be generational as well. Just how everybody kind of operates a little bit differently. So
I love that. Understanding how individuals communicate, are motivated, want to be acknowledged. Those kinds of questions are what help you understand your peers, your leaders, those you work with, those you serve, outside of their generational stereotypes or the generational identities, and really start to get to know them as individuals. What a great example. Okay, so we used a lot of research to pull this all together. We'll leave a few of these up here if you want to jot them down. This recording will be available in the UCAN, so if there's anyone that you know that was unable to attend, they can watch the recording in UCAN probably next week sometime. It'll be ready and live. And then also we will drop the resources in the chat. There you go. Thank you, Taylor. So that you all can write those down if you're interested in looking and learning more about leading or working across generations in the workplace. So thank you so much. Taylor, anything you want to say to close us up?
Honestly, just thank you so much for being here and being present and engaged throughout. It really makes for such a powerful lunch and learn when we hear from all of you. So just thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. You got 2 minutes to run and fill up your water before your 1 o'clock meeting.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.